everyone. Welcome to this webinar that is jointly organized between ERF and the AERC. Unfortunately, Dr. Ibrahim will not be able to make it, so I'll just start a quick introduction, and then Scholastica from AERC also will give some introductory notes, and then we proceed with the presentation. So as you know, this is a large project between the Economic Research Forum and AERC. And at ERF, we really cherish this collaboration with AERC, who is a sister organization in Africa. We always, when we compare ERF with AERC, it's for us a sister organization in Africa. And it's a large project that includes several countries from different parts of Africa. So we have some case studies on Tunisia, on Egypt, on Uganda, and so on. And today's webinar, we're going mainly to present the case of Egypt. So we're very happy to have Dr. Emmanuel Ayouti, who is going to present the Egyptian case. And this paper will be discussed by Dr. Amir Al-Haddad and Dr. Ahmed Fikri. So before I introduce the speakers and the discussants of the session, I'll just ask Scholastica to give some introductory notes, and then we move with the session itself. Over to you, Scholastica.
Thank you so much. I'm presenting this on behalf of Abebe, Director of Research at AERC. Just a minute. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm Scholastica Biemba. I'm a manager of research at AERC in Nairobi. This project is about work and income for young men and women in Africa, growth sector for youth employment project, what about AERC? AERC is a premium research institution which is dealing with capacity building, and this capacity building is to enable us to be able to mitigate problems affecting management of African economics. And we have key programs in training where we have both master's program and PhD. Our research is in both thematic and collaborative, and also we have policy outreach programs. The organization was established in 1988, and with this more than 3 decades of existence, we have mentored 4,200 economic researchers from 35 countries in Africa, 3,800 master's graduates, and over 400 PhD graduates. And many of these graduates are in senior level policy senior level policymakers across the continent. This diagram here just shows in a snapshot of what we are, our capacity building framework, which moves from training, research, and policy outreach. And the goal is that it's about capacity building and knowledge generation. The background and aim of this project, you know that youth unemployment still remain a significant problem and challenge across Africa. Like the recent statistics shows that around 54 million young Africa were not in employment or education or training, meaning that we have, out of the billion population, we have 54 million young people without anything productive. And these young people are 3 times as likely as others to be unemployed, meaning that the opportunities for young people is is smaller than what you expect with adults. More so, young women are disproportionately affected, meaning that out of these 54 million youths who are not under any employment, whether training, 62% are female. And this situation has worsened with the advent of COVID globally. So although in these 3 young people are employed, the kind of jobs that we see that they're involved in are poor quality jobs. Even young graduates, you see that they still have to really struggle to get some decent jobs. And this makes them quite vulnerable to poverty. And this lack of productive opportunity is one of the main drivers of the youth unemployment problem, meaning that our productive sectors within the subcontinent or continent are becoming a major ISO in drivers of youth unemployment. And when we talk about productive opportunities, we know that most of the population of Africa are, most of the African economics are agricultural intensive, rather than the modern kind of sectors such as manufacturing. So given that even the manufacturing sector in Africa has not taken off in a manner that we have envisaged through a lot of policy, international policy agreement, through the AU and everyone there, you find that these productive opportunities are less. Other issues are inequalities in access to employment opportunities. You have seen the disproportionate lenses between gender, the youth, the women, they are getting jobs, the socioeconomic status of who are your networks, maybe sometimes financial muscle within your family or within your environment or within your network, and also geographical locations. We have areas in sub-Saharan Africa where you will find that maybe the environmental conditions or they do not really allow some to even go to school, get some skills which can enable them to be competitive in the job markets. So in this, policies are required to create new jobs that are decent and sustainable in the long term. And policy solutions here should include measures to support sectors with highest potential to create jobs for young people. And you know that in our environment, governments take a lot of role in creating employment. And most of the time you find that the private sector role.
Scholastica,
yes.
2 minutes, please.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
So the project aim it was to identify economic sector or value chain for job creation for young women and women, and also to identify country-specific conditions needed to promote local and foreign private sector, and identify country-specific factors that are needed to create this condition, and explore ways to promote equal access. The project implementing partners, we have the AERC as the lead institution, ODI and ERF, and it was managed under project steering committee, where the chair is Madu Alimbai and secretariat was AERC. So it was organized as framework papers. We have 9 country case studies, which are now being nationally disseminated in 9 countries in Africa. And the last, where I'm pointing there is just the several activities which have brought us to workshop 4, which is in country dissemination. The last activity within the project will be 28th March, where we'll have regional policy forum. Expectation of the project, identification of the most promising sector, which can be able to promote youth employment and increase awareness and understanding of the issues, especially for youth and women, and what are the potential strategies that can be used to promote equal access and opportunity, to strengthen cooperation and networking among the policy stakeholders. And also from the research output, we can always get further studies. With these few remarks, I would like to wish us a fruitful engagement in this workshop. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scholastica. So now we start the session with the presentation of Dr. Iman. So as you know, we have today the case of Egypt that will be presented, and Dr. Iman Al-Ayouti will present a paper entitled Identifying Activities for Greater Employment Generation in Egypt and Input-Output Analysis. So Dr. Iman, just to introduce Dr. Iman, she has over 15 years of teaching and research experience in economics, and she got her bachelor in economics from the American University in Cairo, her PhD from Cairo University, and currently she holds the position of associate professor in the Department of Economics at the Faculty of Business Administration and International Trade. And before, she worked at the British University in Cairo and the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies. And she has also several publications on decent work, on industrial upgrading, and the export effects of privatization and restructuring of public enterprises. So we're very happy to have Dr. Iman, who will be presenting the paper during the next 30 minutes, and then we move to the discussion. So thank you, Dr. Iman. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahir. I hope you can all hear me well. I want to thank first the ERF and the AERC for the opportunity to have conducted this work, from which I have greatly learned actually in the process. As Scholastica said, the objective of this research was primarily for identifying activities for greater employment generation. My case study was that of on Egypt, and I used input-output analysis. I'd like to share just the in terms of outline, I'll be just presenting some background and identifying the research problem. Very briefly, the highlights of empirical literature, but I will spend a fair bit of the presentation on the methodology, the data, the results, and trying to draw some relevant policy implications. Let's just start by saying that between 2006-2017, Egypt's average rate of unemployment was 11%, while the average rate of youth unemployment was 24%, and that is measured relative to youth in the labor force. Measured relative to youth in the population, the average rate of unemployment would be 11% on average. With youth unemployment more than double the average rate of overall unemployment, the identification of activities with potential for youth employment generation is a key policy concern. The 24% rate of unemployment among the youth actually raises an important question regarding the economy's limited ability to create youth jobs, topping its limited ability to create jobs across all age groups combined. And hence, the objective of this research was to identify industries with high employment multipliers, potential employment generators, as well as those with high output multipliers, those being potential output generators. And I just want to allude to the fact that I'm using here the term industry to refer to industry and sector interchangeably. So industry would be used in reference to all economic activities within the input-output table. In terms of literature, we'll find that a strand of empirical literature has shown increasing use of input-output analysis from 2005 onwards, with noticeable focus on agricultural activity. IO analysis was also used as a means of understanding the mechanism of how particular industries can and may generate employment, in addition to driving economic growth. And many of these works uncovered some of the causes of why economies had not achieved their employment targets, some of which were in the case of an interesting case of Pakistan. There has also been an extensive use of IO to explore multiplier effects of new emerging industries, and this is actually quite interesting, and it's fairly recent work. Empirical literature also establishes the existence of large disparities in employment and unemployment among regions within a nation. And we see that this work actually spans a long period of time, almost from the early 80s to date. And it's found that there are clustering spillover effects across regions in employment and unemployment. And therefore, what spatial analysis allows us to do is to examine the effect of regions' employment or unemployment on the respective level of its neighboring regions, and to test whether there are clustering and spillover effects. With reference to Egypt, we find that most empirical studies were largely oriented to unemployment as a macroeconomic problem. And of course, there's a lot of very good work by Dr. Raghi Asad and others. Or unemployment in relation to the informal sector or to the sectoral reallocation of labor over time. And except for one recent paper of Kamel in 2018, where the author obtains employment multiplies by industry for Egypt, I have found actually that there are few empirical studies exploring multiplier effects. And hence, it's to the best of my humble knowledge that the present paper contributes to empirical literature in recognizing the importance of identifying industries with employment multiplier effects, as well as trying to capture the spatial dimension. I'd like to basically just summarize what I have, the main components of the methodology used, because it's been a bit detailed. First is to use input-output analysis to obtain the employment output multipliers. And secondly, to use spatial analysis to test for whether there is spatial dependence in total and in youth unemployment, the year of study being 2016-2017. And thirdly, to use descriptive analysis in two regards. First, to identify regions where the high employment and output multiplier industries are themselves located, as this is expected to have important implications for both total and for youth employment in the respective regions. And then secondly, to probe where the industries falling along the value chain of those high employment multipliers are themselves located. I'll just very briefly go through the method. First, for IO, to obtain the employment multipliers using IO analysis, where based on per the formula, where WI is the share of total employee compensation and industry I's total output as a proxy for the labor coefficient of industry I, and LIJ is element of the total requirements matrix or the Leontief inverse. And WJ is the share of employee compensation in industry J's total output. And the output multiplier for a typical industry J is obtained as the column sum of the total requirements matrix. For spatial analysis, that spatial autocorrelation is actually verified using the Moran's index, which is computed for total employment and for youth employment at the government level. And here we use the employment WI of a specific sector of a specific governor and WJ of the JF governor. And WIJ is the element of a spatial weights matrix. So here what we're doing in the spatial analysis is capturing this contiguity effect through the spatial weights. Also, the third component with descriptive analysis, what I try to do is first to identify where the high employment and output multiplier industries are located, as the location, as I might have explained, is expected to have important implications for total and youth employment in the respective governorates and also in the neighboring governorates, especially if spatial dependence is established and verified. And then to identify where those which are falling along the value chain of those high multiplier industries are themselves located. This is expected to deepen vertical integration across regions. And so the importance of the last step in the descriptive analysis is really to address a practical question. So where are the high employment multiplier multipliers expected to yield employment spillover effects in view of their location and in view of spatial dependence once it is verified. In terms of data, well, I've relied primarily on the input-output data table obtained from the Institute of National Planning, Egypt, for youth and total employment by governorate and employment across different sectors. This is from Egypt's CAPMA Statistical Yearbook for 2017. Data for output of each industry in the governorates of Egypt are obtained from the Industrial Statistics Bulletin, issued also by CAPMAS for the year of study, and data for the geographical attributes of governorates are obtained from shapefiles issued by CAPMAS. I'd like to start by sharing results, but prior to presenting the IO, the spatial and the descriptive analysis results, I'd like to just share some stylized facts pertaining to: one, what is the pattern of total and youth employment? What is the nature of skill composition of the employed? So we'd like to see what kind of skill constraints may be hindering further employment and youth unemployment. In terms of total and youth employment, what we are seeing here, and let me just use the spotlight, if I may, is to showing total and youth unemployment. We're finding that there is a considerable clustering effect that we see in Greater Cairo and part of northern Upper Egypt in Minya. So we see here a clustering of total employment and a similar pattern also in youth employment. And other clusters appear in the Ahliya, Kafr Sheikh, Gharbiya, and Munufiyya. So in the Delta region, also clustered with a part of Suez region in Sharqiya, and in southern Upper Egypt, in Asyut and Sohag specifically. And as I say, this pattern is perhaps clearer if we look at the next. This map is actually the same map, but just showing it a little bigger. And so what we are seeing is actually this. We're seeing this clustering effect that we had alluded to. In terms of youth employment, we find that on average, the youth account for approximately 33% of all employed across governorates. And so while the average youth share in total employment may exceed their share in the population of 28%, yet we can still argue that there is greater room for youth employment, hence our interest today. In terms of skill composition, I encountered a bit of a problem because there was no data for employment by region by skill, and so what I try to do is to use the characteristics of the total employed by skill as a proxy for the youth skill characteristics. I found that there is considerable variability across governorates, and so I resorted to using nationwide averages, and the conclusion is that the bulk of employment tends towards lower skills, indicating that there may be supply-side labor skills constraining further youth unemployment. And we find that almost 62% of employment owes to level 4 and level 2 skills per the classification of skill level occupations of the ILO, of which 46% owe to level 2, which is lower types of skills like crafts and related trades, skilled agriculture, forestry, plant and machine operators, and others. And so we would conclude that there may be some supply side labor skills constraining further employment. With reference to unemployment, which is really our interest in the study, is we find that the largest share of youth unemployment owes to the region of Alexandria and the Hera governorates, with around 24% of total youth unemployment. Next in line would be Delta region, then Greater Cairo, Northern Upper Egypt, Asyut, and Southern Upper Egypt. I was also interested in seeing the gender component or the gender characteristic. And again, because for absence of data by gender, at the government level, I used the share of the unemployed females relative to the females in the 15 to 29 age bracket of the labor force overall, which is found to account for 36.5% of total unemployment nationwide. 20% being the average for males. So by analogy, we could conclude that there would be twice as many unemployed youth females as unemployed youth males also at the government level. So next, I come to the results of the multipliers themselves, or the results obtained for the multipliers. And what I've done here is to rank them in descending order of employment multiplier, and just the asterisk denoting the high output multiplier manufacturing activities, where every unit of increase in final demand for these specific manufacturing industries creates more than twice employment, and twice to approximately 1.7 times the output in all other industries. And these are namely food products, basic metals, motor vehicles and other transport equipment, paper products, non-metallic mineral products, beverages, wearing apparel, and coke and refined petroleum. And as I indicated, the range of the multiplier values, employment and output. For primary industries, where every unit increase in final demand for agriculture, followed by extraction of crude petroleum and mining of metal ores creates 1.45, 1.43, 1.37 units of employment in all industries, in all other industries respectively. For services, interestingly, the leading employment multiplier services were found to be real estate, hotels and restaurants, admin and support activities or services, communication and construction, with multiplier values of to around slightly more than 1.4. And finally, when we compare primary industries and services as output multiplier values, we find that compared to manufacturing, they tend to be less prominent as output generators, with values of output multipliers of 1.56 to 1.1 for primary industries and 1.55 to 1.23 for service output multipliers. Also, for total and youth employment, for the spatial component, I found that the approximate values of the Moran's indices were 0.3 and 0.28 respectively, indicating the existence of positive spatial dependence. And what would this would tell us is that total and youth employment observed in one region would actually depend on or affect those observed in neighboring regions. And hence the spatial dimension of employment is important and location is a force at work. So we would expect local spillover effects among neighboring regions, which was actually evident from the map I shared a little earlier. For value chain relevance, and as Scholastica had indicated, we are interested in this research in probing the value chain angle. We computed the backward linkage coefficient of the industries, those which were identified as high employment multipliers, and we identified the governorates in which these industries were or are mainly located. And to reveal governorates' relative importance as a location, we obtained the share of the respective governorates' output in the nationwide output of the high employment multiplier industries themselves. For services, it was not possible to obtain output data by region, by governorate. So the employment share of services in total governorate employment is used as a proxy for output share in the total governorate economic activity in general. And services were found to be dominant across all regions. So they dominate economic activity, whether in Greater Cairo, in the Delta and Alexandria, in Southern Upper Egypt or Asyut, in varying degrees. So basically what this would tell us is that the service activities that were nominated as high employment multipliers would be are good candidates there without having the specific governorate characteristic. Before I share the overall set of results that I have tried to summarize as neatly as possible, because this has been a fairly detailed study, I just want to share that to allude to with all the results I obtained. What I tried to do was, one, to rank industries by employment multiplier, to show their leading geographical location identified via the relative importance of the region as a contributor to nationwide output, to show the mainstream industries along the respective value chains and the proximity to the end product, which would be expected to actually deal a two-way benefit. One, to enhance domestic value chains, and two, to allow for possibly future engagement or greater integration in global value chains. To also reflect on the industry competitiveness as identified per the revealed comparative advantage. And of course, all the details are given in a large table, table 3 in the paper. And accordingly, the following industries are nominated for youth unemployment mitigation, with special emphasis on the regions of the highest youth unemployment. So here what I'll be reflecting is where is the highest youth unemployment, and hence where are those industries that we would like to nominate based on our research findings for mitigation of youth unemployment. And hence what I am sharing here is actually a lot of information captured with relevance to regions. And basically what I'm showing for each region is the following. I just stop here for a minute to show the annotation. So I would be reflecting on the region of Alexandria. What are our key players as youth unemployment mitigators, and within each of them, I would show which are those which have been identified as competitive and with a global value chain accession prospects, and these are denoted in the brown bubble, and those which are just found to be competitiveness, and over and above with agreement with the green bubble are those that I've also found that they may have potential for, in addition to being competitive and with accession to global value chain perspective or prospects, they are also relatively promising as female employers. So basically for Alexandria, we find crop and animal production, mining of metal ores, food products, basic metals, paper products, wearing apparel, coke and refined petroleum, chemical and chemical products, textiles, rubber and plastics, fabricated metals. And I do not want to take up a lot of time, but I just basically wanted to share this visually because it gives us an indication of the details for by region, and which are those that we are hoping to nominate as the successful or the prospective players. Let me just remove this annotation. And next, I come to what are the policy implications. Let me just start by saying that perhaps these findings are themselves policy implications, that these industries that we have tried to nominate are the ones that we would like to promote further. Promote whether from an investment perspective or from the perspective of prospects for greater integration and greater value chains. And I have found that the nominated industries actually came very much in keeping with Egypt's strategy for industrial development and foreign trade of 2016-2020, which has itself identified the following industries with potential for a higher degree of vertical integration along the domestic supply chains, and also in possession of greater potential for integration in global value chains. electrical equipment, computer, electronic and optical products, motor vehicles and other transport equipment, chemical and chemical products and pharma, crop and animal production, basic metals and food products. Hence, the global value chain angle is findings from the present research are very much in line with Egypt's strategy. Spatial dependence further implies that when we promote investments in regions themselves, this is expected to affect their neighboring regions. So Greater Cairo would bear eastwards on Suez, northwards on the Delta, southwards on southern and upper Egypt. Investments in Delta may have spillover effects eastwards in the neighboring Suez region, and southwards in Greater Cairo. In Alexandria, we expect them to impact the governorates of the regions themselves. And hence, what we would like to recommend is that perhaps it is advisable that Egypt's investment map, which was launched as part of the Investment Law 72 of 2017 to attract investments to earmarked for specific industries in named governorates. I would very much like to complement these with my humble findings in this research. And I would like to, I was waiting for the dissemination of this work to actually channel that to GAFI and to see these nominees integrated in the investment map. I would also find it advisable that the findings here be linked to the Youth Employment Inventory, the YIE of Egypt, of the International Labour Organization, which is part of youth interventions worldwide, comprising more than 400 youth employment programs from around 90 countries. And for Egypt, the interventions actually range from skill training to entrepreneurial promotion to employment services to subsidized employment. So it's a very rich package of or range of interventions. And I was just wish to cite one example of how I would recommend that we possibly link with the YIE, which refers to a database citing 17 of out of 182 interventions, only 9% as specifically targeting young women so far. So perhaps with the identified industries with potential for mitigation of youth, specifically female youth unemployment, perhaps the linking of these findings would contribute, or I hope they would contribute to greater unemployment of female youth. Perhaps for future research, it would be recommended that the location of the employment multipliers identified in this research be compared now a step further with the different categories of the unemployed in each governor, but by educational attainment. And this would be a whole exercise in its own right. And what this might give us is a possible matching of where the employment multipliers are and where their upstream industries would be located with where there is high unemployment among holders of different levels of education. Perhaps as a step towards eliminating the labor demand supply mismatch at the regional level and specifically at the governorate level. With this, I come to the end of the presentation, and I wish to thank you very much for your patience, and I'm sure the discussion will be most illuminating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iman, for a comprehensive and detailed analysis, very rich and very interesting findings. So now we have the discussion, and we're very happy to have the lead commentators, Dr. Amir Al-Haddad and Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdel Wahab. So we'll start with Dr. Amir Al-Haddad, who is a senior economist at the German Development Institute and the professor of economics at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science at Cairo University. She has an extensive experience in industrial organization, industrial policy, the political economy in the Arab world, and she has several publications on informality, on the development in world development. Sorry, her paper on the social contract in the Arab world. and she has also got her PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park. So, Dr. Amira, you have 10 minutes for the discussion, and then we move to the second lead commentator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahir. I'm very happy to be with you here today. Iman, of course, is an old good friend of mine, and I'm just so happy that ERF and AERC and ODI have given me the chance to see her, to meet her after such a long time, even if only virtually. The same applies, of course, to Dr. Ahmed, who I'm very, very happy to see, and of course, you, Shahir, and all the rest. So I would start by commending, of course, the hard work that is quite obvious in Iman's work that went into the analysis and the use of a much underutilized data source. Iman, this is great that you're using the input-output table. I know how much hard work has gone into the this extensive data set, and so appreciate the effort that has been put in it. So Iman has been looking for sectors and regions with high output and youth gender employment multiplier potentials. Basically, this is what we're doing to combat the biggest problem, perhaps in Egypt and plenty of the Arab world. I have in general 4 points that I'd like to raise pertaining to the results. They don't necessarily counteract the results, but they bring another picture or another theory into perspective. So my first point would have to do with the dichotomous choice of jobless versus penniless growth. Or so while it is important to generate high value employment, it is equally important to generate high value employment, not just employment. So penniless growth, more jobs, or jobless growth, better jobs. And this high quality employment is strictly related with structural transformation. Structural transformation, as most of us know, countries are trying to move their production from primary production to more complex and sophisticated production sectors and categories that also come with higher skills for the workers. But of course, a country is constrained with its stock of current capabilities and stock of embedded knowledge that it has, as Hausman et al. Have explained in the product space methodology. And that's why in the product space methodology, they try to sort of expand, a country is trying to expand its production towards slightly more complex products because they want to stay close or in close proximity to their current set of productive capabilities. So they want to improve complexity, but just a little bit. So you want to basically pick products with the highest complexity possible, located as close as possible to the country's current set of capabilities. So in fact, Iman, if you compare these results with the results of my paper where I implemented the PSM methodology on Egypt, you would find that your results are very similar. Your initial results, or I would call them your main results, unless I'm confused about that. So we have very similar results. However, these results point to sectors that are limited in complexity. And so I had a problem with the product space methodology in my own work because I found them extreme and they sort of reinforce the status quo. But they are also equally extreme as the strategic bets methodology, for instance. The strategic bets methodology, in a nutshell, is trying, which takes the other side of the spectrum, which is trying to very quickly steer countries away from light industries such as food and clothing to more sophisticated capital-intensive sectors such as machinery. So between these two extremes, perhaps it is better or a good idea to target a middle ground, of sectors between these extreme cases, where we take into account 3 dimensions, which I call the forward-looking strategy. So it takes into account the own stock of knowledge and capability, the country's own stock of knowledge. It takes into account the connectedness of the selected products with other groups in the product space. So I want to pick groups of products and sectors that have skills that allow me to diversify and move me to neighboring skills, like that move me to a little bit better skills over time. So this is what is meant by connectedness. Those clusters or sectors, such as chemicals, for instance, they are the skill set of chemicals is very close to many other production groups in the product space. And the third dimension that we should not lose sight of is the future predicted growth in international trade in particular. So when I did this, when I implemented, I modified the product space methodology a bit, I reached very similar results to your last set of results, which is when you brought in the revealed comparative advantage into the picture. When I read your paper, I felt this is somewhat disconnected in your description. However, your presentation made me feel this is sort of a thought process and we're reaching those results. So perhaps you need to better work on how you present these results. So, I just felt you're shying away from stressing these, very limited sectors that you mentioned in the end that include electronics, that I can't remember now, but they are quite sophisticated with reasonable employment multiplier and output effects. So I suggest the way you present your results should clearly refer to these trade-offs. So you have category 1, employment generation only, category 2, high value employment generation, which is employment with some structural transformation, and category 3, extreme high value employment generation, which is employment plus structural transformation, like even more structural transformation. My second point is that there could also be another trade-off between domestic linkages and GVCs and global value chains. So GVCs imply not only that producers are exporting their products, but that they're also importing some other products. So what they're actually doing is that they're adding value to value that was already created elsewhere, basically. This is what engagement in global value chain entails. So to engage in global value chains, our government needs to revise generally its protectionist strategies and approach towards levying prohibitive tariffs and non-tariff barriers to import entry. So this is really a policy question. And we need to ask it very clearly in any of our policy work. Do you as government want to be integrated in the world economy, or do you want to stay closed off, minimally connected? Will being part of a global value chain increase my productivity, my growth and employment potential, or will it expose me to risks that I'm not willing to take? This is not for us to answer. This is really for the policymakers and for a more open political discussion in the country. Where do we want to be? What do we want to choose? So I suggest that your policy brief raises these important policy choices. I have 2 more points to make. The third one is about your regional and location results. And it's a bit similar to my comment using the PSM methodology. I believe these results can be used in both ways. The way you are currently using them are reinforcing regional disparities and the status quo, how things look like. This is where all the action is. Let's just give more money to where the action is. But perhaps we should look at how do we get to the other locations and regions, not necessarily the extremely remote, but the reasonably that have hopefully small potential to also reach these employment potentials and spillover effects, etc. So perhaps the policy recommendation shouldn't be, let's put the money here, or the policy recommendation should actually be, if you want this, then put the money here. But this also opens our eyes to another problem. If you want to move outside what you have, your status quo so far, you need to look at these other regions and understand the underlying constraints of why they don't look like that. My fourth and last major comment is that you do make a strong assumption about supply side labor skills constraints to growth, etc. However, there are potentially also demand side constraints. And they pertain to the type of demand that is generated in Egypt. And that type of demand has to do with Egypt being a middle income country. So wages are limited. So the demand is not so sophisticated. And demand is not for high skilled products. Instead, it is for construction, for instance, which is an industry, although you say it creates a lot of employment, etc., but in the end is a low value industry. So we really have a vicious circle of demand constraining skills and supply and labor supply and limited labor supply. So we need to break this. Engaging in global value chains may break this vicious circle, because it will if we target joining global value chains, it will help us meet their demand of high skills, like the outside world, which are not constrained by limited income levels and income wages.
Dr. Amira, 1 minute.
Yes, absolutely. So my last comment is a semantics related comment. I think the expression of vertical integration is really only used, we say when a combination of two or more of the production process is taking place in one firm that otherwise would have taken place in more than one firm. So preferably use the expression of interlinkages rather than vertical integration when you talk about the different regions giving each other, being feeding industries to each other, etc. And finally, I would suggest, if possible, applying the analysis at the product level, and perhaps also combining it with the product space methodology in an upcoming paper. In the chat, I will put references to a very new systematic review about labor market interventions of training, all the interventions you mentioned, Iman, training, entrepreneurship, promotion, employment services, subsidized employment, and as you know, systematic reviews sums up all the evidence of these interventions, whether they actually work or not. So I would put it in the chat. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Shahir.
Thank you, Dr. Amira. Now we move to Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdelwahab. So Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdelwahab is currently the managing director of East Port Said Development Company, the National Egyptian Railway Industries Company, and the Egyptian German Automotive Company. He serves also on the board of directors of a number of government and non-government organizations like the Engineering Export Council, Export Development Fund, Export Development Authority, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, the Egyptian Competition Authority, among others. He's also the vice president of the African Association of Automobile Manufacturers, and he's the current chairman of the School of Business Dean's Strategic Advisory Board at the American University in Cairo, and the chairman of the Egyptian Kuwaiti Foundry. So he has an extensive experience in the industrial sector in Egypt, and he earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and his MBA and his PhD from the University of Alabama. So we're very happy to have Dr. Ahmed Fikri. Dr. Ahmed, you have 10 minutes, and now, and then later, we ask Dr. Iman to respond to the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shahir. I would like to thank the AERF. Thank you, Dr. Shahir, Dr. Amira, Dr. Iman, for a very excellent work done. And it is very much appreciated in light of data scarcity. That's an issue that I personally feel whenever we want to embark on doing something, especially in the policy domain, to find enough data to support what we're trying to do. So well done, given this constraint. I'm going to divide my comments into 3 parts. And I appreciate very much what Dr. Amira has said, and Dr. Amira and I have worked on a couple of things related to the automotive industry, and I will reflect on this in light of the paper that we have in front of us. To start with, I am a strong believer in the importance of global value chains in developing economies, developing employment. And I think that from a policy perspective, that is something that needs to have a higher focus. We have not managed to do a good job in clustering industries in Egypt. And I think that's a point worth investigating, why we haven't been able to do that. I very much appreciate the analysis that has been done with regard to spatial dependence and the different governorates. But I think, again, having lack of data makes it very difficult. But that is something that is very important to identify how these global value chains can be part of the development of employment in Egypt. I would like to also talk about you mentioned motor industry. I work in the motor industry, and you've identified that as your, I think, the 3rd highest multiplier, employment multiplier in your study. Related to the skill level, the motor industry has a wide range of skill levels, from wiring harnesses, which require virtually no skills, to very sophisticated types of development. And interestingly, in Egypt, we have both. We have around 25 or 30,000 people making wiring harnesses for export, purely for export. And we have over 2,000 engineers just developing software for export to Europe. And the question is, why have we not been able, and these have been around for more than 20, 25 years, and the question really is, why haven't we been able to replicate this model more and more? And I think that's a point that is worthy of some sort of investigation. And so what I'm trying to say is, perhaps for further or future research, we need to focus on a domain. And I think Dr. Amira has a paper on the automotive industry. And we've talked to Dr. Anthony Black at a point of time. They have a lot of work done in South Africa in that field. We need to focus on a number of sectors, could be the top 3 sectors that have the highest employer multiplier effect, and say, we need to learn more about this. And interestingly, you will find a lot of support for this type of research. I'll speak on the African Automotive Association of Manufacturers. We are doing a lot of work for Africa to see how we can develop the value chain in Africa, accumulate origin. We all share the same pain. Most of these countries, I'll now talk to about the work that Dr. Shahir does in terms of the impact that trade agreements have on Africa. We've signed a number of trade agreements, and they've impacted employment. And that's a question that needs further investigation. So that's one area that I think the area of global value chains. By the way, for reference, there is a very good paper on global value chains and employment in developing economies, written by Claire Holweg, and it's a very good reference for this. And to cite some examples, Thailand and Vietnam are two very good examples of how they've been able to integrate in global value chains in the motor industry in particular. Moving to my second point, and that is skills. I'm quite involved in the supply side skill issue, and that's an issue that on the vocational side we've been wrestling with this for 20-30 years, and we've not been able to crack it. It's all over the place. Different ministries handle this fight, and because it is all over the place, we're unable to come up with a focused strategy that tackles this this issue. So that's another area where we need, again, to pinpoint where the problems lie and how we can get a better measure of skills. I realize that you've used the ILO classification, but you need to have, and it takes me back to the data scarcity, you need to have access, or we all need to have access to better or more granular information with regards to the skill levels and how they map with jobs in different locations. Now, my last point, and it's a point that is very dear to my heart, and that is the what you allude to at the end or the conclusion of your paper with regard to the policy implication. And I have, for the past 15 or 20 years, been working very closely with decision makers in Egypt. And the big problem is we, in many cases, we're able to identify where the pain is. And so we know what the problem is in most cases. But the problem is, the bigger problem is we're unable to properly formulate policies. And this debate that has been going on, there's a paper that was written by Dr. Ahmed Galal and Dr. Nihal Al-Magharbel about should governments pick winners and losers, and this whole debate that industrial policy and what should happen in industrial policies, and Danny Rodrigues with his revitalization of industrial policy. We're far removed from this. And with all due respect to the reference that you have in your paper with regard to the policy, Egypt's policy 2016-20, it is a very high-level document. And as I said earlier, we need to pick, that's my view, we need to pick areas where we see we have a future, be it from a market growth, and we have very good markets that are growing and where we can develop industries and we can develop economies of scale, and focus on these and look at the different ingredients that would make these a success. One of the biggest impediments for good policy formulations is having people in the government that are able to do this. And we've seen also in the past 10 or 15 years, many government bureaucrats leave, and you end up with someone at the top of ministries and a big gap, and then people who have nothing to do with policy formulation. And policy formulation cannot be done by the private sector because they have a vested interest in having a policy that would serve their interests. So that is an issue, and it's not just Egypt. I think it's generally in developing countries, Africa, we see this all over the place. I have to say that even while we are developing a policy for the automotive industry in Egypt, and by the way, we are trying to do this for the 10th time in the past 10 years, we are getting a lot of help and support from South Africa to do this. And without this, it would be very, very difficult to formulate a good policy. And a good policy needs people not just only to formulate it, but to follow it up and change the path as we go along, because it's not a static document that you just issue and say, this is the policy and we stop. You may want to, you definitely have to have some sunset clauses in it, and you have to have some mechanisms of follow-up and review for these policies. I've taken a lot of time, but I thank you very much, and very, very well done. I enjoyed the paper, and I look forward to more research in this field. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Iman, you have 5 minutes to respond to the two discussants, and then we can perhaps collect some questions from the floor. Over to you.
Yes, my pleasure. First of all, of course, I want to thank both Dr. Amir Al-Haddad and Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdulwahab for the, I can see that they read the paper with a lot of care and a lot of zeal. And this is something that I hold very dear. I just want to actually respond to Dr. Amira with one general remark. My take is the following, that when you're trying to use a certain methodology, of course you are aware of its limitations. And I myself was, in as much as I try to get the most out of the input-output analysis that I use, I am quite aware of the limitations. However, I could not delve into the space, the product space, because that's a whole domain in its own right. So what I was trying to do is to capture as much as I possibly can from the core, which is the input-output analysis, and to use the spatial component actually as I don't want to say auxiliary, but as a supporting evidence. That and then to thread from this the linkage to the value chain. And the global value chain was not itself the ultimate objective, as whether we can get or have accession in global value chains or integrate, but the objective was the following. One, let us identify where those employment generators are, where the output generators are, geographically, where are they, and if so, how do they link together? Are they close? Are they not close? Can we strengthen the domestic supply chains and hence have a better chance of integrating in global value chains? So my concern was not, as a study concern, not so much about the trade-off between global value chains and the possible policy constraints to that, or government action, or any of the policy scope aspects. So I hope I have, I do understand very much where Dr. Amir is coming from, but as I said, I did try to explore and to make the best possible outcome of the research method, given, of course, its limitations. I do thank you very much for your insights and all the valuable comments. For Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdulwahab, of course, I know the length of your experience and the depth also, not just the length, but the depth of your experience in industry, and specifically in the motor vehicles industry. I would like actually very much to capitalize on the work that you have alluded to on how to develop value chains in Africa. So if I may, if you can, share with me some of that work, so perhaps I can also make reference to that, because that would be a relevant policy recommendation that I can add to the paper. And in this regard, I kind of again underscore what I was trying to point to Dr. Amir, that in my conclusions, when I wrapped up, it was like trying to pull all the different ends together. And I did try, it was a very painstaking process, and I did try to do it as well as I could. So I hope I did an okay job with that. Your last comment about the supply side skills issue, that we are wrestling with it, you are absolutely right. And I wish I could obtain more granular data. I kind of probed here and there, and the best I could get was the data based on this ISAO classification. So if there is more granular data, I'd be more than happy to see how I can work with that. Our inability to properly formulate policy, well, yes, again, that has always been an issue that we grapple with, but we as researchers try to do our end of the job, trying to just put the torchlight based on research findings. So thank you so much for very valuable comments. Thank you, Dr. Shahir.
Thank you, Dr. Iman. So now, do we have any questions from the floor? So we have one question. I can't see who is the person who raised.
Dr. Nuruddin Hussain.
Oh, yes, sorry. Dr. Nuruddin Hussain, please go ahead and ask your question.
I'd like to, first of all, thank you so much for the incredible work. The entire webinar has been extremely informative, and I can only imagine like how valuable the information that we've been able to access today to everything that we do here at the Ministry of International Cooperation in Egypt. I just had two like technical inquiries about, first of all, with the presentation that was presented earlier in the webinar. Would it be possible if you can share it with us? Obviously, if you can, that would be extremely helpful. And I've also noticed that there is a YouTube link for the webinar. So my question is after the live session, will we be able to rewatch the entire webinar through the YouTube link, or will it expire after the live session? Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nuruddin. I think on the technical question, perhaps either Namis or Ramash can respond. And so Namis has just responded. It will always be available and it will not expire. So we'll be able to listen to this later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps we can collect some questions first and then you respond after that. Other questions from the floor? Well, if not, so perhaps I just have two questions, one question and one suggestion. But Dr. May Gadalla would like first to ask a question and then I will come after her. So Dr. May. Okay, so Dr. Iman, I just have a question and a suggestion. I totally agree with the suggestions provided by Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Amira on the importance of focusing on the demand side, because one of the, perhaps risks that we might encounter is that we just focus on the sectors where Egypt has either an existing or a potential competitive advantage, but at the same time, in the medium term or in the long term, the global demand of these sectors are declining. And in this case, even if we specialize in these sectors, will not really be able neither to increase exports and consequently will not be able to generate jobs. So I think focusing on this demand side, at least, even I totally understand that the input-output table does not take into consideration the demand side. It's mainly the supply side. But at least in the policy part, to question the supply side dimension and take into consideration what are the potential sectors that might increase employment in the medium or in the long run, given the developments of the global demand. And a question also regarding the, something that perhaps I missed in your presentation. I didn't really understand how you calculated the backward and forward linkages in order to identify the GVC insertion at the word level. So that's just a clarification question. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuruddin, Dr. Shahir, and I was hoping to hear also from Dr. Maygadallah, but that's to my loss. So Dr. Nuruddin from Ministry of International Cooperation, I would be actually more than happy to share the presentation. And in this regard, I actually would like to take up the opportunity, and this is something I also ask of Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdul Wahab, if you can help me to promote these research findings. I know for a fact that I wanted to share this with people from the Investment Authority and in GAFI, but if you have suggestions also as to how to get these research findings to the right spot, I would be very happy to have your help on that. Dr. Shahir, your suggestion about focusing on the demand side, I think I will try to do that, even though it may. I'll try to see how I can tackle the demand side, even if I can just make reference to it. With reference to your question on how I calculated the forward and backward linkage, let me just clarify, because there's a lot of detail in the paper perhaps that did not show up in the presentation, that what I was doing is doing the following. From one of the advantages of the input-output is that you can actually track the activities. And this is basically what I did. I know that these are the industries which are the high employment multipliers. I know their backward linkage coefficient, so to speak. And then what I did was I pinpointed what are the activities which fall along their value chain. And then the next step is, well, okay, if these are the activities along their value chain, the upstream activities, are they geographically close? And of course, this was another undertaking, but basically, yes, we can say that they are geographically close, and there's a table that in which I give all the results of that. And so finally, what I did was to link this to global value chains is to say, well, of the industries that we have looked at, what does the literature tell us about those which have been successful, or I can't say so much about successful, but which have had a chance to have some integration in value chain, and then which are the outstanding ones that still need a little bit of a push. So that's the response to your question. Thank you. I'm not sure if Dr. May is still with us.
Yes, just joined. So Dr.
Yes.
May.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shahir. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Iman for her great effort in the presentation and the work. I really enjoyed her work. And actually, I also enjoyed Dr. Amira's and Dr. Ahmed's comments and their feedback on the paper. I'm not a macroeconomic person. I'm not an economist at all, but at least I'm more familiar with the microeconomics than the macro. So my question, actually, it might be related to your question, Dr. Shahir, about the possibilities of linking these sectors with information that can be received from the economic census or establishment census that were conducted in 2012, 2017, or around these years. From these census, actually, the sectors that are growing fast or are shrinking can be identified through the number of jobs that they created through these years. And I wonder if these information can be linked to the information that Dr. Iman has gave us about the sectors with high multiplier and low multipliers. So this is my question. Thank you.
Is the question for me or for Dr. Shahir?
Actually, it's related. I think it's related with what Dr. Shahir has mentioned about using the demand side. It's for you.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not an expert. I have not had a lot of experience with the database that Dr. May is referring to on establishment. So if you can please, perhaps if you can share some of that, and I can see how I can link my findings with.
The thing is, you have the establishment census in 2 years, or is the economic census in 2 years. One maybe at 2012 and the other one at 2017 or 18. So it's very relevant to the date that you're using. So what you have the sectors, and you have the number of jobs and the share of these sectors in each year, and you can develop an indicator that reflects the fast growing sectors between these 2 years.
Okay.
I mean, which sectors has grown the fastest. And I believe, and you can definitely do it by governorates as well. So I believe that at certain point you can link this data with the results that you can retrieve from the data with the results that you have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
This is a suggestion for future work.
Actually, yes, this is my next point that I can see. I'm happy that I triggered that much appetite and interest, and this is actually an honor for me. But as I say, you know, there was so much I could put into a paper or into one paper. So thank you so much.
So thank you, Dr. Iman, for your responses. And so now we come to the end of our webinar. Again, I just want to thank our colleagues from AERC and Dr. Iman for an excellent presentation, really comprehensive and very rich, for all the constructive comments of Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Amira. And as Namis said, you will find the link of the recording on the website of ERF and on YouTube as well. So thank you all, and have a nice evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahir. Thank you, Dr. Amira. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Fikri, Abdul Wahab. It's been a pleasure and a very informative webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.